How are you guys doing today? Uh, Patholoran. This is going to be a Bible study of Luke chapter 20, and I'm going to be taking people's questions and see what we can get out of it. We're in the last couple chapters of Luke. We've done the first 19 chapters. Now we're on the 20th chapter. I'm going to get started. I'm not worried about, who's tuning in. Parameters on YouTube, though. That's good. Okay. Luke chapter 20. I'm going to be reading. Actually, I want to read from the NET today. That's what I want to do. The New English Translation. Let's see what it says. Luke chapter 20, verse 1. Now, one day, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple courts and proclaiming the gospel, the chief priests and the experts in the law, here we go again. So the chief priests are not the Pharisees. The chief priests are the Sadducees, from what I understand. At least in general, the chief priests were always Sadducees. So there are these two different parties in the leadership of Israel at this time. The chief priests were technically supposed to be in charge, but really the Pharisees were kind of in charge because they had teamed up with Rome, and the Pharisees were were taking over sort of the system. But the chief priests were still the ones technically in charge of prosecuting and convicting criminals and stuff like that. So they had to work together when there was a common threat that they wanted to get rid of. The Pharisees and the Sadducees both had to work together. So you had the chief priests and the experts in the law with the elders. This is basically talking about the Sanhedrin, the leadership party, the government of Israel. With the elders, they came up and said to him, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is it?" That's a weird way of saying it. "Or who it is who gave you this authority?" I thought the NET was a good translation. This is a weird way of saying this. By what authority are you doing these things, or who it is who gave you this authority? He answered them, "I will also ask you a question, and you tell me. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from people?" So they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why do you not believe him?' But if we say from people, all the people will stone us, because they are convinced that John was a prophet." So they replied that they did not know where it came from. Then Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by whose authority I do these things." So the baptism that he's talking about here, it has to be the baptism of Jesus. This can't just be the general baptism, because the question, does it come from heaven or from people, sort of, why would anybody think that it came from heaven if it was the average person? But you remember when Jesus got baptized, there was the Spirit that came from heaven and a voice, and it was a miraculous event itself, and it looked like it was from heaven. So John's baptism here is probably a reference to Jesus' baptism by John, and then therefore that's why if they say it's from heaven, they'll say, "Why do you not believe him?" Because John testified that Jesus was the Messiah and the chosen one. So that would explain this question. And of course, I don't think there's a lot of mystery here. He's just saying, this is more proof that the chief priests and the experts in the law and the people who are part of the temple system were scared of Jesus, and they were also scared of the people. Apparently, the people, at least around the temple at this time, were such devout followers of Jesus, and especially of John, which again, I will mention the series Chosen, The Chosen, which I like in some ways. They do a very, very bad job of portraying John the Baptist. John the Baptist was so popular and so influential and so obviously good at what he does that the chief priests and the experts in law in the temple, their stronghold, their headquarters, were scared that the followers of John were going to physically kill them with stones if they denied that he was a prophet. So this is not some freak, some weirdo like the show tries to portray, that John the Baptist was just sort of a hippie radical who was just sort of like making it up as he goes along. Good evening, Henry Zuzi. Parameter says, sorry, to clarify, by John's baptism, it means John's baptism of Jesus. Yes, that's what I was saying, is John's baptism of Jesus. That's why he's asking, is it from heaven or from people? Because there was a miracle when John baptized Jesus. The Spirit like a dove came down, and there was a voice from heaven. And so some people would have believed that was actually from God and a proper miracle from God, which hadn't happened in, hundreds of years. God had not been doing miracles or sending prophets for hundreds of years in Israel. And now suddenly John the Baptist is there and he's doing amazing things, and this miracle happens, and people were more impressed with John than they were with Jesus. And so he's just asking, was John the Baptist really a prophet that was doing miracles on behalf of God? Because if he was, then Jesus is confirmed to be the Messiah that John the Baptist was talking about. So John the Baptist is like the sort of character at this time that changed everything, that paved the way for Jesus in a very real way. And it's very sad that we don't recognize John the Baptist's contribution more and what he said. And I really wish we had a bigger following today of, not of John the Baptist. Obviously, you're supposed to follow Jesus, but at least giving him credit and the changing of the covenants and this preaching. The things that John the Baptist said were actually very radical, unless you're already looking at it through the Christian perspective. If you're looking at it from the Old Testament perspective before Jesus, then it's very shocking what John the Baptist was doing. And by the way, Debbie, good to see you. Thank you, Max and Debbie, for the salt shakers here in the stream. That is the icon of the stream. So now in verse 9, it says, then he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, or I should say probably a vineyard, leased it to tenant farmers, and went on a journey for a long time. When harvest time came, he sent a slave to the tenants so that they would give him a portion of the crop. However, the tenants beat his slave and sent him away empty-handed. So he sent another slave. They beat this one too, treated him outrageously, and sent him away empty-handed. So he sent still a third. They even wounded this one and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, what should I do? I will send my one dear son. Perhaps they will respect him. But when the tenants saw him, they said to one another, this is the heir. Let's kill him so the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they said, "May this never happen." But Jesus looked straight at them and said, "Then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and the one on whom it falls will be crushed." This is an important teaching we're going to get back to. Then the experts in the law and the chief priests wanted him to arrest him that very hour, because they realized he had told this parable against them. But they were afraid of the people. We're going to stop there and recap this because this is crazy. They were not afraid that the Messiah was warning them about what God would do. They were afraid of what the people were going to do if they arrested Jesus publicly and did something to him. Now, it's very hard for me to imagine living in a time and a place where somebody like Jesus is walking around, healing people, doing miracles, giving prophecies, and then when he warns that you're doing something wrong, literally, the story is about how they will try to kill him. They say, "We better try to kill him." Like, how about you just don't try to kill him, and then that parable won't come true? Like, he says the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By rejecting him, they're going to fulfill this prophecy and make him more powerful. But clearly, it seems like they're actually atheists. It seems like they don't believe in the scriptures at all. They don't believe that Jesus and all of the miracles he's done, the lame, the blind, these people are walking around that day. They are still alive. They are testifying actively about what they saw Jesus do. There was the dead person coming out of the city, remember, where they were leaving the city, and Jesus just raised up the person from the dead, and everybody was afraid. Like, these people are still around, and somehow the chief priests and the leaders are not even concerned about the fact that he's the Messiah and he's going to judge them. Instead, they're worried about what the people will say. So it makes it seem like they really, after 400 years of prophetic silence, have lost all touch with God. They are now just running a system in which they have political power. They've been navigating these pagan empires that they've been living in, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and now Rome. And they think that they're good at it, and they're prepared to just keep this going forever. Just a temple. They don't care about the prophecies anymore. They don't care about the Messiah anymore. John the Baptist is just sort of a weirdo that they don't, he's very popular, but they don't care about him. And Jesus is even somehow, less worthy of proper religious respect, even though he's the one doing the miracles. I don't know if you guys can imagine this, but it's very strange to have multitudes following Jesus and testifying about miracles that he's doing, like Elijah, like, the Old Testament prophets. And they're just so blinded by Satan that they don't care when he tells them this parable, that God is going, in this parable, the owner of the vineyard, God, is going to kill them. It says he's going to kill them and destroy is the word it uses, destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. So, also, by the way, we have a guy in chat who's got some very shocking information for us that might change everything. Somebody named Baron Chamber says, "Wait, there are no eyewitness accounts of Jesus, none." So that's a guy on TikTok who wrote in all caps that there's no eyewitness accounts of Jesus, even though we have many, and it's more testified, and there's more accounts of it than of any other person in history. But I guess if this guy says that there are none, then we should all just get rid of our Bibles and go home and stop studying it because this guy said so. I mean, Professor Baron Chamber coming in and just dropping this shocking information on us. Unfortunately, I already started, so I'm going to finish doing the study, but maybe after this, I'll just, I'll just give up because I didn't know. There are no eyewitness accounts. They have Matthew and Mark. I understand that Luke wasn't there as an eyewitness, and John was an eyewitness. Mark wasn't an eyewitness. He was the disciple of Peter, from what we understand, and he basically wrote down Peter's version of the eyewitness accounts. And Luke says that he went and did his entire gospel, which we're reading right now. We're reading the Gospel of Luke. He says that he went and did his investigation by talking to all of the eyewitnesses. That's actually what the Gospel of Luke is it's a report based on all of the eyewitnesses. So, anyway, this guy just told us that that's not true and that I guess it's all fake and these people died and were killed horribly for some big prank that they were trying to pull. He says all the Gospels were written decades later. Well, what do you think they were doing during those decades? Do you think they were not actively, constantly involved in the persecution and spreading of the teachings? I mean, that means that for decades they were walking around with the witnesses and with the other people who experienced this stuff and celebrating Jesus' teaching. Lots of people were raised from the dead when Jesus was raised from the dead and he came back and visited. These are people who were actively being opposed by those in power and suffering and dying. And so they spent decades teaching people who then went and spread around the world. Every year, you probably don't even realize this, Baron Chamber, although you do seem to be one of the world's foremost experts to be able to talk so authoritatively on this. Christianity started spreading early because Jews would come from around the world to the festivals and feasts in Jerusalem after Jesus, and then they would go back to where they came from. And so there was this influx of Christians, or influx of Jews, who heard stuff from the disciples and the apostles, and then they would leave. They didn't stay in Jerusalem forever. And so you have Christianity spreading before the Gospels are written. And the entire history of church literature just perfectly aligns with an organic movement that is centered in Jerusalem at first. But anyway, I know that you must have done a lot of research on this because you just said, nuh-uh, it's not true, and have no argument. So there's that too. I guess we have to consider that brilliant insight that you have. Michelle says, did you hear Israel's going to put people in jail for talking about or using the name of Jesus? I did hear that. I have to look up the story myself yet. If that's true, that's very strange, because I'm pretty sure Jerusalem has huge sections, quarters that are like Orthodox Christian. And I guess they would all be getting put in jail. It sounds kind of, I'm skeptical that anything is going to really come of that. But I will say that if you look into the land of Israel and a lot of their territory, the Orthodox Church actually owns a lot of that territory, some of the critical Holy Land territory, and they're basically leasing it to the Israeli government, and that lease is going to run out someday, and then it actually reverts back to the Orthodox Church. And so Israel has a very, very strong reason to try to destroy or discredit the Orthodox Church, which is now basically based out of Russia and Turkey. So Russia and Turkey are kind of in the crosshairs of Israel, because otherwise that land is going to legally revert back to the Orthodox Church. And so if you're a conspiracy theorist, you might think the war against Russia, anything crazy like huge earthquakes that are happening in Turkey, this might be an alliance of Israeli alliance going against the Orthodox churches and Russian Turkish forces in order to try to make sure that when that lease runs out, they can keep the Holy Land without having to give a bunch of it back, because that would basically destroy the whole Zionist Israeli idea of how they were going to take over the land. And so I don't know. I've just done some research on this. Some say that the territory that the Orthodox Church owns is not that big and important. Others say it is critical to the whole idea of the Holy Land. And so I think it's within the next 10 years that the land is supposed to revert back to either the Turkish, maybe just the Orthodox Church, period, in which case it might be Russian or it might be Turkish. I'm not sure. But thanks for that question, though. We will have to wait and see what happens with them passing that law, if they do. And if they do, I mean, they lose the whole evangelical Zionist side of their supporters, which is huge. A lot of America's support comes from evangelical Christians. And so if they start persecuting Christians openly in Israel, I don't think that they win unless they are hard switching their allegiance to China or some anti-American coalition, which doesn't quite seem likely. So I doubt that it's going to happen, but Israel will have to become the nexus point of a lot of crazy events, of course, so who knows. Anyway, we are talking about this parable, and I want to get into the parable itself. So it says, this is very clear that it's talking about God sending prophets to get a crop from the tenants who are managing the vineyard. That's a very good metaphor, because the vineyard is Israel, and the crop that he wants from them is faith and justice and good things. Obviously, I don't think God wants physical wheat and, meat and sacrifices as much as he wants the holiness itself, a well-ordered and good society that honors him and respects him. And that's a very reasonable thing to want. It's to have a portion of the crop from his own harvest. He owns that land. And the tenants who are managing it, the managers of this vineyard, are just beating up his slaves and sending them away. They're very greedy. And so they want to have all of the righteousness for themselves. They want to be the ones who are given all the honor and glory. If we're talking not about material goods, but about a type of recognition and righteousness, the leaders of the Israelite tribes in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land, they want all of the credit. They don't want to honor God properly. So he sends multiple, and they treat them worse and worse and worse. And so he says, what should I do? I will send my one dear son. Perhaps they will respect him. This is clearly not what God actually said. Like, the idea that I'll send my son, maybe they'll listen to him. God knows that they're not going to listen to him. In fact, if you read Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you know for a fact that they will reject the Son. They will reject the Messiah. They are cursed to not understand the Messiah when he comes. There's no chance that they will actually listen to Jesus when he comes, to the Messiah. So this is kind of a hypothetical argument here that Jesus is making, that realistically there's no chance that the chief priests and the scribes are going to do this. Even Jesus himself earlier in his ministry said, they have to reject me. I need to be rejected by the chief priests and the elders and the scribes and the legal experts and the Pharisees. And he predicted his own death over and over, right? So this is all a formality. This is playing out because prophecy requires it to play out this way. And yet he's still giving the analogy as if it wasn't set in stone. This is not a self-aware event. He's telling them the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, because the people said, may this never happen. Let's hope that this never happens, that, the Son of God would be killed. And then Jesus tells them, but look at this prophecy, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. He has to do this. And so that is the enigma of Jesus' ministry, is that he's going through it knowing that it's doomed, knowing that it's not going to happen. He's not going to set up the kingdom like they want. He's not going to be accepted by the leadership. And it doesn't change anything when he even tells them to their face. They're just like, it says, the experts in the law and the chief priests wanted to arrest him that very hour because they realized he had told this parable against them. They are the killers. And so they want to kill him. It's very weird, and it touches on the whole question of predestination and God's will being greater than our will. Even if we have free will to some extent, we are not rational beings who go and make proper decisions at every moment. When God wants something to happen, it will happen, even if it's absurd that somebody would do that in that situation, and defy prophecy, try to defy God. They have to play out their part, and so they do. And I find that very interesting. Taking a bigger picture look at it. Let's see some more comments here. Cindy says, I'm going on a tour of the Holy Land in October. So excited. That's cool. I know somebody else who's going in, I don't know if it's September or somewhere around then. And it's got to change sort of your sense of what was going on in the Bible. Give you sort of make it real, make it feel more immediate and relatable in some ways. Michelle says, I think if they pass the law about Jesus, could be the back door to kill the two witnesses. Well, I mean, I guess if they need a legal argument, it says actually in Revelation the two witnesses are killed by the beast who comes in and does it, makes war against them. And so it's a war by the beast. It's not the a legal death sentence by the government of Israel, from what the prophecy looks like it's saying. I don't think they need a legal foundation to make war against them and kill them. By the way, the two witnesses will be cursing everything and destroying people with fire and stopping the rain and all sorts of crazy things for years. And so they probably are violating some laws themselves when they are doing their witnessing. That you're probably not legally supposed to be killing people with fire and sending curses and plagues on mankind. So I don't know who starts the fight, but the two witnesses are not going to be sitting there passively preaching. They're going to be old school style prophets who do massive destructive miracles. And anyway, so let's continue with our study here. Verse 20 says, Then they watched him carefully and sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They wanted to take advantage of what he might say so that they could deliver him up to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor, the Roman governor. This is why, and I've heard this very recently, there's still an argument to this day between Jewish rabbis and stuff like that saying, we didn't, because they speak on behalf of Jews, which first of all is inaccurate. There's lots of Jews who have become Christian, and there's ones who are totally atheist or whatever. But they try to say, Jews didn't kill Jesus. They didn't do anything wrong. It was the Romans who did it. And here you have in the gospel, of course, the chief priests and the Pharisees who don't represent the people, you see. This is why you can't speak generally about Jews doing this stuff, because the majority of people love Jesus. The majority of these Jews love Jesus. In fact, the chief priests are scared of arresting him because the people will kill them if they arrest him. And so, no, he was not rejected by all the Jews. There was a small group at the top who hated Jesus, and they were trying to send spies, but they were afraid of the average people. Bigfoot. We are talking about Luke chapter 20 and of the gospel in the Bible, and we are looking at the entry of Jesus into Jerusalem and how he's preaching there, and the leadership of Israel at that time is trying to find a reason, an excuse to hand him over to the Romans and have him killed. Verse 21 says, Thus they asked him, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and show no partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right for us to pay tribute to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their deceit, and said to them, Show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription are on it? They said, Caesar's. So he said to them, Then give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Thus they were unable in the presence of the people to trap him with his own words. And stunned by his answer, they fell silent. I mean, this is just one of my favorite stories Um, so first of all, he tricks them with the question about John's baptism, whether it was from heaven or from people. They don't know how to answer it. Then he tells this parable about the vineyard and how the son gets rejected and killed by them. And then they say, well, we should kill him so that we can become the people in this in this parable. And now he's again turning their trick question around on them, and just doesn't care that, like, he doesn't care about money. This isn't telling us to give away our money to the government, but it is asking, about these taxes. Is it right to pay taxes? The answer is yes, it is right to pay taxes because they issue the currency. You use the currency. And if they want to tax you, they can do that. Let's say the government taxes you a lot, and so that it's bad, it's annoying, it's hard to live. In the end, your job is not to become wealthy. Your job is to serve God. And so, although it sucks, that's not your currency. The currency is issued by the government. It's a government currency. And so, if you have to give it back, big deal. That doesn't affect the more important thing, which is your soul. So it's nothing to worry about. And that's why he flips on them, because they were very greedy, of course. And if they actually listened to him, they would give away their money and be happy to pay taxes to Rome, which they hate. On TikTok, here we have Wolfpox Clips saying, "Hey, Mr. Wolf, very good to see you, Wolfpox Clips. Is this a new account that you made?" Helena says those same leaders corrupted the Bible to make it confusing for those who didn't understand. What are you talking about there? Which Bible did they corrupt? You must be talking about the Old Testament, since the New Testament wasn't written at this time. What do you mean they corrupted the Bible? They corrupted the Old Testament somehow? Anyway, we will wait for some responses. Chat is not saying much on YouTube, but that's okay. We're in the sort of final quarter of this chapter right now. They're stunned by his answer about taxes and about giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. And then he says in verse 27, or it says in verse 27 of Luke chapter 20, "Now some Sadducees," Luke doesn't mention the Sadducees much by name, but here we actually have a direct mention of them. He says, "Now some Sadducees who contend that there is no resurrection came to him." So the Sadducees are actually the ones who were running the temple. That's kind of the interesting thing here. The Pharisees had all these synagogues, and they were spread out across the whole land of Israel. And so then they were controlling the average doctrine of people around Israel. The Sadducees were based in the temple, and they were the ones that actually take care of the temple and did the sacrifices and that kind of stuff. And yet they don't believe in the resurrection. Now, why would they not have believed in the resurrection? Maybe they just didn't have faith. But the Old Testament doesn't talk a lot about the resurrection. I mean, there's stuff in Daniel about the resurrection, but it's a very interesting argument why the Sadducees wouldn't have believed in the resurrection, because in many ways the Old Testament doesn't emphasize a resurrection. So they might have been trying to be faithful to the Old Testament, the Bible as they had it. And I haven't done a deep study of that argument, but I would have to look up the different places in the Old Testament that actually mention the resurrection. I'm pretty sure Daniel mentions it as one of these weird prophecies at the end about how they're going to rise up, and people, some will be raised to glory and some will be raised to everlasting shame. And so it's interesting that Luke says specifically that they didn't believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did, even though the Pharisees are also not good guys. They just believe more things about what's going to happen in the future, or at least they taught that. So this it's a complicated scene here. You don't just have one group in charge of Israel at this time. Wolfbox Clips says they tried to they deleted my account. They tried to unsavor my salt. Did they give you warnings, and did you appeal them? Because it's so strange that I don't get warnings on my account, but you take clips of my videos and then they take them down, and I hope they're not taking them down because of, like, copied content or something, because you have my permission to use them. No warning. They just deleted the account. Wow, they apparently still don't like me, but they're not making a move against me right now. Then again, TikTok itself is going to get completely banned by the government soon, so I guess it won't matter that much down the road. But yeah, it sucks. I suggest people go and follow Wolfbox Clips here. Go give him a follow, because he goes and takes clips from my YouTube channel, my YouTube lectures and stuff that is not on TikTok, so I appreciate your support there, and your taking the clips, finding stuff that you find interesting, spreading it around, and hopefully people who are a fan of mine will see different clips that they haven't seen on TikTok before, because you're taking stuff from the YouTube or wherever else you're getting it from. But the deleting of the account with no warning is obviously, that's exactly what happened to me. So it's just they did not give me warning, and every time they gave me a warning before, I appealed it, and then it got overturned because I wasn't breaking any rules. Now, we still don't have an answer about how the Old Testament was corrupted, I don't think. Let me check the comments here. Bigfoot Tracker says, if the Bible was corrupted, then why would God allow man to do so? That's the Christian sort of argument, that God will protect his word. Marty says, when studying scripture word by word in Hebrew, it's shocking what has been changed in the English. It's not shocking. You can do a word by word search, but I mean, Hebrew scholars who do study it word by word are the ones who do the translations into English and other languages. I don't know if you think English is the only translation that exists, but there are French and German and Russian and all sorts of different translations besides English. And I don't know if you think those are all accurate, but English is the only one that's not. But the experts in Hebrew are the ones who do the translating. So unless you are more of an expert than they are on Hebrew, I don't see what because you go by who doesn't understand Hebrew, you um, you know better than them, I guess. I suggest people read, if you're interested in the translation side of things, I suggest people read the New English translation with the full study notes. You can go into the Hebrew, go into wherever you want, and they have a lot of commentary here about translations. Like, they had a team, I think, of 20,000 scholars who are experts in Greek and Hebrew, consulting on this and looking over the verses and trying to make sure they didn't miss anything. Like, this is one of the most studied, transparent, open, undisguised undertakings that you can get. So, I mean, like, I'll just give you a random example here. Exodus chapter 13. Okay. Let's find this. Exodus chapter 13, verse 11, it says, "When the Lord brings you into the land of Canaan, land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you that and your fathers, and gives it to you, then you must give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb." Now, there's a footnote there that says that the Hebrew, in a certain manuscript, says, "And it will be when Yahweh brings or will bring you," meaning future tense, will bring you. So that's just a tiny little note, right? It's not important. They didn't have to tell you that, but this manuscript says it will bring you. And so they explain that there's multiple ways you could translate it, but they decided to translate it that way. And there's all sorts of like little details, big details. Some have all sorts of footnotes on them. But anyway, these scholars are not working in some secret place where there's, shadowy deals being made. They're trying to interest people in the translation. And I know that it's easy to read a Hebrew word out of context and then just assume that the translators are doing things wrong, but it also just undermines the Bible. Like, you're arguing that no Christians for hundreds or thousands of years have had an accurate translation of the Bible. You're saying that the Bible is not trustworthy because we have the English translation and we've all been using the English translation. So if it's shocking what has changed, that means that we've all been deceived this whole time. And that's kind of a depressing claim to be making, and I'm guessing you can't really back up what you're saying either. You just guess that that's true based on some conjecture that you've had. Marty says Job refers to resurrection. Right, and so people didn't consider Job to be a genuine ancient document, and so they wouldn't have taken Job as seriously as they would take, for example, the former prophets and the Torah. Wolfpox Clip says you had almost 200,000. No, I actually had over 200,000 when I got banned out of nowhere. I had 220 plus thousand followers when TikTok banned me for no reason, no stated reason, although it was right after I made a video about the Vatican signing a treaty with all the religions of the world about the green movement. We've got someone preaching Allah here in the comments. Okay. Let's get the let's get back on track here. Jesus is talking to the people. The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. They asked him, "Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, that man must marry the widow. If a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, that man must marry the widow and father children for his brother." This is a very strange concept. I did not, not familiar with that from the Old Testament that Moses wrote that, but that's apparently the policy. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died without children. The second, and then the third, married her, and in this way all 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For all 7 had married her. You see how the implicit assumption is that women will continue to be married to their man once there's a resurrection. And this was a very valid question in their mind. This is pretty actually shocking that Jesus says this. Verse 34, "So Jesus said to them, the people of this age marry and are given in marriage." This age, meaning before the next age, before Jesus comes back and there's the resurrection. It also indicates that the resurrection is the start of the next age. People who just talk about going to heaven and they don't think about the resurrection, they never want to think about this either. The resurrection marks the beginning of the next age. So there's going to be death, but no resurrection until that time, and then there's going to be a resurrection. We should start thinking more about the resurrection and less about just going to heaven as a spiritual plane of existence that's removed from earth. We will be resurrected back on this very same earth, if we're lucky enough to be resurrected. So Jesus said to them, the people of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are regarded as worthy to share in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. In fact, they can no longer die, because they are equal to angels and are sons of God, since they are sons of the resurrection. Michelle says, new heaven and earth. The resurrection happens 1,000 years before the new heaven and new earth, actually. The resurrection happens on the day of the Lord, which is when Jesus comes down from heaven with his army and defeats Satan and locks him up for 1,000 years. That's when the resurrection happens. It's the same day. It's the same process. The marriage supper, it's also called in Revelation. It's when evil is defeated, Satan is locked away, the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire. Satan is not cast into the lake of fire. He's actually just locked up for 1,000 years in the bottomless pit. And so Michelle says, yes, but we will get a new heaven and new earth. Yes, true, we will. Even after this earth disappears, we don't just go to heaven. That's correct. We actually go to a new earth. And right, so you understand that. But a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't teach that. So this teaching from Luke chapter 20 is actually very important for getting some facts straight on this, because this is not revelation. This is not a vague prophecy about something that you could interpret a million different ways. This is Jesus talking to people, asking him a very real question about a hypothetical situation. I mean, they are trying to trap him with their question, because they don't believe in a resurrection. But their question is perfectly valid. Thank you, Wolfbox Clips, for the tips and the gifts there. I don't redeem these gifts. I don't know how to redeem them, so I don't know if I'm going to benefit from the gifts, but it does help promote the stream, so thank you for that. So each one of these sentences Jesus says is very interesting and important on its own. The people of this age marry and are given in marriage. That means that in the next age, we don't have to expect that that's going to continue. Now, that is weird because we all think that marriage is the sort of the foundational policy that God has for how mankind should operate. It's the picture of what he wants us all to be doing. But it's apparently limited to this age, which means God isn't as dedicated to that idea for mankind as you might assume. He says, those who are regarded as worthy to share in that age, in the resurrection from the dead, they will not marry or be given in marriage. So, weirdly, you have the idea of worthiness being tied to not needing to be married anymore. Now, that doesn't make much sense to us because we think that marriage is about love and that marriage is about a sacred, unified bond between soulmates. But the whole point of the question in the first place from these people was about this policy that Moses created, that if a man dies but didn't have children, his brother's supposed to come in, sleep with that wife, and produce children. It's about reproduction. Marriage was about reproduction, about furthering humanity, about furthering the human species, if you want to say it that way. But because these people won't die anymore, they are immortal in their resurrected bodies, they don't need to reproduce because they'll just go on living forever. So you can actually see the argument here is all about the role of marriage. Marriage is not about, even though it's nice to love your wife and it's nice when your wife loves you and that's all supposed to be happening, God doesn't want dysfunctional relationships. But the logic of marriage is the propagation of humanity, a propagation of Israel specifically, and this idea of, not originally, but for the Israelites, it's very important that they are multiplying and that they go on living because that's the logic of this age. So the resurrection, being worthy to be immortal, then eliminates the need for reproduction. And therefore, marriage doesn't make sense anymore because you don't need to be married. Wolfbox Clip says, a world without marriage and without gender, says Jesus. Let's see if it says that. Okay, let's see if it actually says that in the text. Because I don't see anything here about gender. Michelle says, change in the twinkling of an eye. Spiritual body won't be given in marriage. We have physical bodies now. Wolfbox Clip says, what about Gentile kings in new creation? Would they be able to be fruitful and multiply? Would they be like us? These are all good questions. What it says here is nothing about gender. I am reading from the New English Translation. I'm going to reread this from the King James, and we're going to see how different it sounds. And I'll just use the New King James because it'll be a little bit more smooth. Jesus answered and said to them, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are counted worthy to attain that age, and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. nor can they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and the sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But even Moses showed in the burning bush passage that the dead are raised, when he called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. Now, that aside, there's nothing in here about gender at all. I mean, I'll look at a different translation. Here's one called a faithful version. It says, the children of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are counted worthy to obtain that age, the resurrection of the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. And neither can they die anymore, for they are as the angels and are the children of God, being children of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed, etc. So there it says they are as the angels. Let's look at the interlinear here. It says, neither for to die anymore are they able, like the angels. That's a word, isengaloi. Isengaloi. It just means like angels. They are the sons of God, of the resurrection. You know what? This might be a good time to actually look up the study notes. Why not? We're doing a study. I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert on Greek. Let's look up Luke chapter 20 in this translation and see what they argue. So here are some footnotes from that. Those who are regarded as worthy to share in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. In fact, they can no longer die because they are equal to angels, they say. And here's the note on that. It says, angels do not die, nor do they eat according to Jewish tradition. And then there's a bunch of examples they give on that. From First Enoch, the wisdom of Solomon, some Second Temple literature that wouldn't be in the Bible. They were very they wrote a lot about angels in the Second Temple period, and those became traditions. It says, and are sons of God, since they are sons of the resurrection. It says the sons of God being the participle has been translated as a causal adverbial participle here. I mean, that's just a grammar choice. Another way that they say, they don't actually say anything about gender in this, because the text just doesn't even imply that angels are genderless. Note that they are called sons of God. Son is a male term. I have argued that there's nothing stopping us from looking at this and saying that people could still have sex. You could still have genders in the resurrection and have sex. Angels had sex with women in the story of Genesis. In fact, they lusted after the human women. That was the whole point. So they had sexual urges, and they went and actually fulfilled that temptation. The idea that angels have no sexuality, no thoughts about sex, they're completely neutered and neutral and have no interest in human women, it goes against, at least from what I understand, it goes against the whole account of Genesis, where the angels go down and have sex with human women because they lusted after them, and they saw that the women were beautiful, and they coveted them, and they were jealous that there were all these women around. That's how you got the giants, right? And so the logic that we become like angels and therefore there's no sex, is a little bit weird, because you have to kind of argue that the Old Testament is not true, and the text doesn't actually say that the angels... See, this is the thing. Angels don't get married. That's true. But marriage and sex are not the same thing. So it's weird, of course, and I don't assume this is true, but it is technically not being said that nobody will have sex in the resurrection. It's just saying nobody would be married in the resurrection, because the purpose of marriage in this age is to have children. The purpose of marriage in the resurrection doesn't exist anymore. You don't need a wife and somebody to raise your kids and, and take care of the household and this concerns we have of this age. You would be an immortal like an angel, but actually we have evidence that angels did have sex drives. They had urges, and therefore the angels that don't do that would be restraining themselves. Also, there's a passage in the New Testament about how women should cover their heads when they pray because of angels. And if that's interpreted the way that basically everybody understands it, it's because the same idea still exists, that if a woman is praying, she's opening up a connection between herself and the heavens, the realm of the angels. And if her head isn't covered, and because the hair of a woman was considered to be her beauty, it's an alluring thing. Back in this day, it wasn't. I guess they weren't as obsessed with the body as much as with a woman's hair, whatever. So you're basically inviting a bunch of angels to look at you, and you should cover your head because of modesty. You don't want to be tempting a bunch of angels. That's the idea of what Paul was saying. For the sake of the angels, the woman is supposed to cover her head. And there's also a metaphor of a husband being the covering. So, in other words, a angel would look at the woman and understand that she's the property of a man, and therefore know that that's forbidden and she's not available. There's a spiritual politics of women being available to angels in theory. Nobody's claiming that they still go around sleeping with women, I don't think. But it is kind of strange to think that even if we become like angels, which it doesn't say here, it says we are like angels. It's not that we become angels, we become like angels in the very specific sense that we do not die anymore. We take on that property of angels. We don't actually become angels. Angels were never born from women. Angels did not have a human existence. They did not have blood. They did not have the same flesh that we had. So we don't become angels. Angels also are strange beings who were created before the foundation of the world, and they have this whole different perspective than we do. All of these things get mixed around because we don't actually understand angels. And then when the idea is that we become like angels, we don't know how to think about that. I don't see anything here about becoming a genderless angel. I see that we're not going to get married, and that like an angel, we will not die anymore, or we will not be subject to death. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying this and you think this is an interesting discussion, please do tap the screen. If all of you guys do it, tap a bunch of times, we'll boost the likes up high enough, and then more people will get invited into the stream, and more people can hear about this analysis that you pretty much won't hear anywhere else, because nobody's willing to look at the text this way and actually see what it says and what it doesn't say. I didn't even know this was in this chapter, but this is a very important point about the resurrection. And, pretty much every woman, I think, has this idea when they get married that they will reunite with their husband in the next life. And the Jews, because of this teaching from Moses, they thought that if there was a resurrection, the woman would have to still belong to the husband. So this continues to be a belief even at the time of Jesus. And we still believe that today. Women often think that they're going to become, they're going to reunite with their husband and their kids, and the family unit is going to just continue in the next life. Other people, because of the idea that we all become genderless angels, believe that we all go to heaven and then we become brothers / sisters / non-gendered beings who just sort of do nothing with each other, and there is no more reproduction, there's no more sexual interest, we're free from those lusts of the flesh which were considered negative and evil. And honestly, we just don't know if there would be such a thing as sex or even the interest in sex in the resurrection. I'm not going to sit here and say it's definitely something and then there's some sort of special rules about the resurrection and how sex works in the next resurrection, and that's part of the paradise of, because there would have to be women involved and there would have to be, who knows what's all involved, right? What we do know is that angels apparently did find women attractive. Women were created for men in the Old Testament, and it was about reproduction. So Michelle says, I had to swipe out to be able to tap. Hey, well, you're doing it now. Thank you for that. We're getting close to 10,000 likes. That's great. That helps the stream. Thank you for that. Laughing Home says, I don't want to know my husband in heaven. He's not a believer. He won't be there. Interesting point. In fact, Jesus says that a household will be divided, husband against wife and son against, dad, and mother against daughter, and households will be divided by the gospel. And that's a common feature of Christianity. So if you were reunited with a husband that you didn't want anymore, or that you were stuck with in this life, that would kind of be weird. Point of No Return says, in my faith, we will be with our loved ones. Husbands believe this too. We all do. Well, yes, but I've never heard a man, personally, I've never heard a man talk about heaven or the next life in terms of, I can't wait to spend an eternity with my wife in the next life. I'm not trying to make a joke about it, but the idea that you are stuck with this woman who you may have mixed feelings about by the time you die, and that's an eternal, billions and trillions of years later, you're still married to this same woman, was never a fantasy in the ancient world. That was never a thing people particularly wanted, except insofar as they could have more kids or whatever the resurrection was supposed to be, because Jews didn't think of going to heaven at all, really. Except Elijah went up to be with God. But The resurrection was always supposed to be on this earth where you would want to have more kids. So this whole thing is based on a very Catholic distortion that we have, that we have to try to deprogram ourselves away from. But even then, you can't just go back to the ancient Israelite point of view, because they also didn't understand what was really going on. Jesus is trying to explain what it's actually like, and nobody understands what he's saying. We still don't understand what he's saying. This is why I like to just actually look at the text. It says, the people of this age marry and are given in marriage. So Jesus has a vision of what it will be like in the next age, and there's just marriage. There will be people. In fact, Revelation explains that there will be a bunch of people who are not resurrected, but live in the resurrection age as mortals. We will be on earth in eternal, immortal bodies, while there is a whole world with mortals who are still having to have kids and live the way that we do, live normal human lives. And there's going to be a race of supermen, a race of immortal beings, the Christians who are, as Jesus says, worthy, regarded as worthy to share in that age. You see how that's a great statement of worthiness, of promotion. Those who are worthy to share in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Now, if that means they don't have any interest in women or sex or any sort of sexuality, I have no problem with that. That I'm sure that whatever it is the best possible life you could have. If it means you're not going to get married, but you could still have sex, and maybe you could still have kids. The reason why and I know this is crazy, right? But the reason why I indulge that idea is because of stuff like the promise to Abraham that his seed will be like the stars of the sky and like the sand of the sea. If that was to be literally true, there would have to be so many billions of people who ended up being born from the descendants of Abraham that we are not close to fulfilling that. But if a resurrected immortal person had kids, they could have an infinite amount of kids. And those kids maybe would be immortal too, or maybe not. We don't even know what that would be like. And if this extends all the way to new creation, new heaven and new earth, that could be an infinitely large planet, or it could be a series of planets that we could travel across. It could be all sorts of things that our very basic imagination doesn't really even consider. And so that's in the book, Maybe Everyone Is Wrong, that I wrote. I do talk about this. I speculate on what could all happen in the new creation, in the resurrection, etc. And I think that we shouldn't rule it out for the very simple reason that I don't want to be, I assume I'm going to be surprised by whatever happens. God is going to have a bunch of surprises up his sleeve. But I don't want to be attached to a Catholic Church dogma about what the next life is like, and then get there and almost be shocked or scandalized or disappointed if it's not the way that the Catholic Church said, because that's where we're getting all of these stereotypes from about angels and about the resurrection and about the next life. And we're just genderless angels floating on clouds with harps. That's not actually what the Bible says. So if you break away from that, you start to think about what the text really says, you go look at it for yourself, there are more options. And would it fit in with prophecy? In some ways, yes, it would, because then the children of Abraham could truly be almost infinite. In fact, over enough time in new creation, it would be infinite. It would just keep going and going and going and multiplying. In this age, people die, and so we have to replace the population with new children. But that's not the case for those who are resurrected, because they just go on living. And it says that not that they are angels, but that they are equal to angels. They are like angels. And they are the sons of God because they are the sons of the resurrection. And that's something that you have to be worthy to share in. So not every Christian might be worthy. Even though you're a Christian, you might not be worthy to be part of that special time period and experience of the resurrection. I would love to be part of the resurrection. It says that people who are martyred for Jesus and to get their heads cut off will be part of that resurrection. I would love that to happen. I would look forward to having my head cut off for the gospel so that I could. That's a cheap, very nice ticket to resurrection. I mean, I would take that deal any day of the week. I think it would be awesome. But, either way, you want to be worthy to share in that resurrection. Should we move on? He does talk about Moses. Jesus plays so loosely with the text of the Bible, it's crazy sometimes. He says, Moses revealed that the dead are raised in the passage about the burning bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, he is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Like, that's such a creative twist on the text that I don't see that in the text. Guys, thank you for the salt shakers. Oh, I missed a couple questions too. I'm sorry about that. Norman says, stuck with my wife would be great. No bills, stress, money, etc. No sickness, no pain. Yeah, I mean, that sounds good for, a good 200 or 300 years. Look, I have to make a joke about this because I don't know how else to deal with the idea of why God would set this up this way. The point of no return says usually women don't want to see their husband in heaven, as someone already said. I mean, if your love is strong enough, it sounds awesome. It's just, I'll be honest, I have heard real Christians get honest with me and say, I'm worried that heaven is going to be torture. I'm worried that 400 years into heaven, it's just going to be the most boring, uneventful, uncreative, routine, sort of slavish non-existence with none of the things that I want to do, and it'll all get very old and boring, quickly. Now, that's a blasphemous, crazy, sacrilegious thing to say. But it's also based on a bunch of assumptions that we got from the Catholic Church. And I don't think it's a coincidence because the Catholic Church blasphemes all the time. That's what they do. They're the beast of Revelation. They go and blaspheme by their nature. They make up stuff about the Bible that's not true. That's their function. And so what happens when you're not looking at it from that point of view? Well, you get resurrected on this life, this planet. And you could start doing things that you wanted to do in this life, but you couldn't before. You could become a master of chemistry or biology or plants or animals or studying the stars or, anything under creation. You could actually devote your life to that without having to have this limited time frame where you're always sleeping and eating and showering and worrying about different things and working. You could become masters of creation just by having an uninterrupted eternal life. You could pursue your interests. You could talk with other people and develop ideas and create things for thousands of years and millions of years if it went on long enough, although this world will only be for about 1,000 more years after the resurrection. But a new creation that can just go on forever. So you're not going to be stuck on a cloud playing a harp and just doing a routine all the time, from what I can tell. And so it actually becomes exciting to think about the next life. And you can start to wrap your head around it a little bit. And that alone pushes it completely into a different conversation about all the things you would like to accomplish and what it means to be the image of God. God is the creator of the universe. If we're in the image of God and we achieve that final form and we're in communion with God directly and we can talk with him, maybe we could all become more like God and create and be wonderful, collaborative, interested, involved geniuses who glorify God constantly by the wonderful things that we do. I mean, I think this is worth getting excited about and thinking about the kingdom in this sense. And it all does come back to what Jesus says here in Luke chapter 20 about the resurrection and being worthy of that, and how the people of this age are married and are given in marriage. But the next age, there are different rules. Wolfbox Clip says, it's interesting that the next generation whom we are among will witness it. As far as my theory goes, yes. DB says, there will be no marriages given in heaven. Also, it is my belief we won't remember our earthly life. I completely reject that idea because it specifically talks about how they're going to, there's so many things to say there. First of all, those who are in heaven today are witnessing what's happening on earth, so they have to have a memory. They're looking at us right now. And then do they lose their memory when the resurrection happens? Do they get wiped? That would be bizarre, because appreciating the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and his impact on your life should be a part of what your eternal existence becomes. Thirdly, anything you suffered in this life is supposed to be paid back to you in the next life. Whatever you suffer in this life for Jesus, you're supposed to be paid back. If you don't remember suffering, it doesn't matter. If you don't remember being killed for the gospel as a martyr, you're not going to appreciate that you have all these blessings in the next life. You'd wake up and say, why do I have more than everyone else? I don't remember ever suffering. I think the whole point of our suffering here is to make the next life that much sweeter, that much more just, that much more poetically beautiful and worthy to give glory to God for eternity. I think that if we are, it's nice to think we won't remember pain, but actually the pain gets a new context of, boy, I'm glad that God is my Redeemer and that he destroyed the evil and he blessed those who trusted in him, and it just would inform your whole existence in the next life. Please don't believe that you're going to be memory wiped after this life, because in a way what you're saying is that God just gave you a bad existence and you're not even going to want to remember it, and that it would be better if you didn't have this life, which is not true. You want to have this life. You want to use this life to serve him and look forward to the blessings in the next life and look forward to the persecutions in this life, because they're going to give you blessings. So this life really matters, okay? This isn't just a waiting period to go and become something else. This all matters, and God is watching you right now. Angels are watching you right now. And you're supposed to be proving something about your relationship with the kingdom and with God and with Jesus, so that the next life is that much more meaningful. Turnip Farming says, I think we will remember it to a degree, to have great reverence for the honor to be in the grace. Right. Rudy says, will there be free will in heaven? Heaven is a temporary storage place. I hope you guys are picking that up. Heaven is a place where you wait for the resurrection to happen. I think you do have free will. I think that once you are in heaven, the reality of the spiritual world is so overwhelming and all around you that your way of and you'll also be free from this earthly body, so you would be in a very different state of mind. So whatever free will you do have, you would be submitting to God so constantly that you would be giving away your free will. You would not want to exercise that free will very much. And then you would still wait for the resurrection, in which case I think your free will is even less impeded in the next life. I think free will goes up in every age. In the millennial kingdom, you have more free will, more autonomy to decide things. In new creation, you probably have the maximum amount of autonomy and free will. And in this life, we're sort of subject to all these temptations and spiritual forces and prophecy and all of these things that are sort of limiting what we can do, because that's the nature of this age, is that we're stuck in this river of prophecy that we can't escape from no matter what we try to do. We can only submit ourselves to God as children, but when we mature into the fullness of the resurrection and then the next life, you would be able to be given much more responsibility and much more authority and freedom. So I think that's a great question, but you have to stop thinking about just going to heaven and start thinking about an eternal life on a physical plane of existence with an immortal body. You have the best of both worlds. Point of No Return says, what does this have to do with our lives now? Who cares if our old man is in heaven? Well, it makes a big difference whether you're looking forward to heaven or not. It makes a difference what you should be praying for, what you should be expecting. Your heart's stance towards God and towards the next life matters. So, again, this idea that you just sort of reset into the next life and then forget everything is a backwards way of thinking. You want to be cognizant of everything and have those memories and then get a more full understanding. So, are you looking forward to being with your husband in the next life? You know, I would like to see my father in the next life. I would like to meet all sorts of interesting people throughout history and have my memories of the relationship, so that, you know, but in a new context now where he's not my father anymore. We're more like brothers, and, you know, we could actually share our testimony and all these things. We'd have new language, new life, new bodies. It sounds like a wonderful thing, and this life just helps inform it. Maybe in that life it'll actually look weird to look back on this life, and we'll think of how bizarre this setup was, almost unnatural how it felt. You know, that's probably how it will be, is you'll look back on this life and you'll be like, that was so weird. You know, I'm so glad that now I don't have to think about all those things, and those memories that I have were clearly just preparing me for this. Wolfbox Clip says, will there be time in heaven since it's eternity? Maybe a new concept. I think, yes, there has to be time, because like I study in my book, Maybe Everyone is Wrong, Revelations, Conspiracy in the Kingdom of Heaven. I will plug the book a little bit. I point out that in the description of New Jerusalem, it specifically says that there's a day and a night, and there are seasons and months. The tree of life, which is in New Jerusalem, is going to have different fruits every month. In fact, it sounds like, I think it says that there's 12 months. Let's see. So it says that the gates of the city will not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there, meaning the city won't have nighttime. But I argue that that does not mean that the rest of the new creation doesn't have day and night. It says, here it says, in the midst of the street of the New Jerusalem, and on either side of the river, there was the tree of life, which has 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. So it says that in Revelation chapter 22. So there will be months. So that's a type of cycle. How would you know when the months are if there's no time? The whole logic of day and night didn't used to be about calendars and clocks as much as heavenly movements of the sun and the stars and everything. So it actually seems like there's going to be a 12-month yearly cycle still in New Jerusalem. And that would imply that there's a heavens. Of course, it says there's a heavens and an earth. New Jerusalem comes down from heaven, the new heaven, down to the new earth, which means there's a sky. There are maybe planets and stars. Maybe there's something else. But presumably there is a new constellation, a new heaven, and a new earth. And there's still a relationship between those two things. The heavens still dictate seasons. And, you know, New Jerusalem has the tree of life producing fruit every month that's different. So there's your variety. You can have different fruit every month, 12 different fruits. So again, you start looking at the actual specifics and it becomes very fascinating to me. The point of no return says Catholics make heaven to be awesome. I don't think it's them. I've never heard being stuck on a cloud with a harp. Really? Maybe I'm going off of pop culture references that I know they have purgatory, which is not biblical, and then I've never heard them say anything nice about or exciting about heaven, but I will have to look into that more, I guess. That's a fair point. Turnip Farming says, lead with 10 commandments, not fruits of spirit, swing and a miss, in my opinion. Oh, they didn't do so well. And says, to worship God without distractions, which want to take away from God. Yeah. Wolfpox Clip says, God will teach us many things like he did with the angels. Snappy says, serious question. How do we know we won't ruin it again like Adam and Eve? Well, we will have our memory of this life. We will have tasted death. We will have known the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. We will know the cost of sin. We will have the Holy Spirit within us. We will be free from the curse of this flesh, and we will have the knowledge of good and evil, which they didn't have when they did it. And so there's just a lot of reasons why we are in a much better position than Adam and Eve. Also, I just have to point this out as a thought experiment. Adam and Eve only screwed up because God made a special rule about what they should do and not do. In the new creation, we don't know what the rules are. So God could permit a lot of stuff in the next life that he did not permit in this life. And the context of everything would change. So depending on what God allows or does not allow, there could be a whole different arrangement for what screwing up would even mean. You know, for example, we are supposed to eat from the tree of life in the new creation, but Adam and Eve were specifically forbidden from eating it once they had sinned. And so, you know, we have different rules, it seems like. Fascinating conversation, though. I'm loving this conversation. Thank you for the 20,000 or the 16,000 likes. Let's try to get to 20,000. I'm about to wrap this up. We're going to finish off this chapter. We got a couple verses left. I should probably just go to those. Lisa says, even experiencing food is something God wants for us. Joys and hardships, pains and hurts. Well, yeah, in this life we should. In the next life, God is going to wipe away our tears. There will not be any pain, I don't think. But we will be able to eat, obviously, because there's going to be fruit on the tree of life. I personally think that we might be able to do farming and crops and all sorts of interesting stuff in the next life. I wouldn't be surprised, at least, if there was botany and animals still and all sorts of interesting things to do in the creation in the world. We have somebody saying heaven and hell are just made up. That's always good to see. Nothing really interesting being said, though. Okay. Right-wingers are stupid. Cool username. Says, when was the last time you took a person living on the street into your home? Never. I've never done that. I don't know if I've ever met a person living on the street. And if I did, they probably wouldn't want to live in my home. But interesting question there. Some people want me to ban trolls. I don't mind trolls. They keep the comments going. Let's see. Right-wingers are stupid says, do you ever actually live your beliefs, or do you just preach hypocrisy on the internet? Well, if you knew what my beliefs were, you would know that a little bit. But yeah, I think I do what I preach, because I don't preach that we live 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. So we're not going to be doing the same things that they did, where there's cripples and blind people just living in the street. We have social welfare now. We have a very different circumstance. Most charities are corrupt, and the way to help people now is different than it used to be. And so for updated current day things, I think I'm not being that hypocritical. LD says, can please elaborate that we won't be raptured before tribulation? Yeah, there's very simple arguments for that. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we're supposed to take up our cross. We're supposed to not try to save our life. We are actually supposed to embrace the idea of dying. Those who are resurrected are actually those who are martyred and have their heads cut off. So that's a good thing, to be a martyr for Christ. We have the Martyr's Mirror itself, this wonderful book that I always promote, huge, thick tome that documents hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of Christians being killed with no rapture. And if you think that you're so special that you deserve a rapture, but all of these Christians did not, I would like to see your argument for why that would have to be the case. They suffered things that I would be surprised happened again. Horrible tortures, worse than you would imagine. And also in Revelation, it says that in Revelation chapter 6, I believe, in the 5th seal breaking, it says that there was a bunch of martyrs under the altar in heaven who were saying, "How long, O Lord, will you take before you avenge us?" And the answer that God gives them is, actually, you have to wait until the rest of the brothers and sisters are killed like you were. It just actually says that in the text. And so that kind of debunks the rapture. It kind of says that people are going to go to heaven and be confused, and then God is going to tell them, don't worry, you're all going to have to die. And then the next thing you see when they discuss heaven, there's this multitude of people who died in heaven suddenly, and they came out of a great tribulation. And you can imagine that that's a rapture that took them up, but it specifically says they're not going to be thirsty anymore. They're not going to be burnt by the sun. They're not going to have all these sufferings, implying that they died from horrible things. And so you can imagine a rapture in there somewhere, but the rapture is really just a confusing of a lot of different warnings. And there's a reason why there's no central text they can point to. They have to sort of jump around and pick one piece at a time here and there to make it sound like there's going to be a rapture for the average Christian. So anyway, tribulation is not even a bad thing. So don't worry about it. People are piling in with all sorts of interesting comments right now. I love that. Thank you guys for those who are hitting the likes, the tapping the screen. Keep that going while the conversation is happening, and then the whole thing becomes more active and more people get invited in. Ravi says, New Jerusalem is so interesting. There will be no light sources because Jesus is our light. Actually, I would disagree with that. Jesus and God is the light of, well, what it says is that there's no need for light sources. There may be extra light sources, but we don't need any other light source than God. So certainly, I would say it's possible that there's no extra light source. If there is, it would possibly supplement or enhance the light from God, but then that's only New Jerusalem. That's not counting everything outside of the city, which there will be a whole new creation, new heaven and new earth, and New Jerusalem is just the capital city of that creation. And so it's the light source for itself, but not necessarily for the rest of the creation. There could be a sun and moon and all sorts of stars still. And yeah, I do think it's very interesting. John Veteran says purgatory is the invention of the Catholic Church to get tithes. Yes, that is true. Let's see. John Veteran says, if Adam and Eve did exist, they didn't. Eve was the first transgender woman and a clone. What an interesting thing to say. Very deep thoughts. So, I mean, in a sense, she's a clone because she was taken directly from Adam, but a clone implies a direct copy, whereas God is able to make a fully complex human living being out of dirt. So, if you kind of understand what happens, God can change matter. He can change the structure and system of an organism when he's creating it. He doesn't have to use our crappy technology, so he could make an entirely new being out of dirt or rocks or a rib in this case, and it's not a clone. A clone would be a direct copy. But nice try. I understand what you're trying to do there. You kind of failed, though. You didn't really think about it. I'm missing so many comments, but I do need to wrap up this chapter study. I think I will do that first, and then we'll come back and see what I missed. It says in verse 41 of Luke chapter 20. Yes, we are still doing a Luke chapter 20 study here. But he said to them, how is it that they say that the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. If David then calls him Lord, how can he be his son? Very interesting question. No context is really given around this. I think in other Gospels there might be more of a story here, but here that's all that it says. But it's very interesting. Just like how he says God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and therefore there's a resurrection because they must be alive because he's not the God of the dead but of the living. There's a very interesting twist on the scriptures. He also uses this one psalm as an example that Christ isn't really David's son. And this just proves that the genealogies in the New Testament are not important. Christ does not consider himself to be the son of David in any literal sense. He says he is older than David. He says that David is Christ's son in a sense. So the genealogy doesn't matter. Joseph doesn't matter. Joseph is a guy who was standing around while God created Jesus in the womb of Mary. His genealogy doesn't matter. And those genealogies are about Joseph. They're not about Mary. People try to twist that and make it about Mary. Nobody kept track of women's genealogies. That just didn't happen. And they even try to make it sound like Joseph had some connection to this stuff, but it's just, they're missing the point, which is what you would expect at that time. But Jesus is giving this parable here saying, he's not even David's son. You know? And by the way, in the ancient world, they didn't even think of women as contributing to the genetics of a son. They thought that the woman's womb was an incubator for the man's seed, and that the child was a direct, entirely produced by the man, and the woman didn't make that much of a difference. On some level, at least. From what I understand, that's what scholars and everyone says. The idea that there's an equal genetic synthesis between the man and the wife to produce a son that is shared between them as a byproduct of both of them is not really an ancient point of view. But anyway, either way, Jesus is distancing himself, saying, if David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? And that's just another thought experiment that Jesus takes from one obscure psalm, or not necessarily obscure, but from a psalm anyway, and he makes this theological point about it, which shows that the psalms are prophetic. They're not just random psalms. And then we've got like 3 verses left, okay? I'm just going to get through this. As all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, beware of the experts in the law. Again, Luke keeps emphasizing that Jesus taught about the experts in the law, because Luke is the disciple of Paul, and Paul hated the Pharisees. And so these are true stories, but Luke is emphasizing the ones that relate to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the experts in the law. They like walking around in long robes and love elaborate greetings in marketplaces and the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' property and as a show make long prayers. They will receive a more severe punishment. And that's the end of the chapter. It's a warning about the legalists who are self-righteous and they love a big show of their righteousness and their religiousness, but they actually devour widows' property. It's a very real thing. They would go to widows, and because the man was no longer there to protect them, they would try to convince the woman to give their property to the priesthood. It says, as a show, make long prayers, they will receive a more severe punishment. So false religiousness and hypocrisy is actually worse than just being a sinner. It's interesting, we've actually get close to 20,000 views. Now a bunch of new people are coming in right as we're finishing up the chapter, but we can still take some questions. We just finished a study of Luke chapter 20. We have somebody saying, if I join your religion, do I have to spend eternity with people like you? If you join my religion, I guess so, yeah. Maybe in New Creation you could go off and do your own thing, but you could definitely run across me somewhere in there. Jeff says, can you explain how great heaven is? No, I cannot. Joe Fent says religion is historical fiction. But let me guess, you don't think that prehistory is historical fiction? You know, the thing that's before history that scientists write about as if they know what happened. The prehistory is not a mythology, that's not fiction. That all definitely happened, but it's before history. That sounds a little bit like a religion to me. I don't know. The idea that there's billions of years of history before history, and it's written down and made up by guys who write textbooks and never actually saw anything and have no proof. And you're supposed to believe them because they taught you it in a building that you were forced to go to as you're a kid. And they teach kids all sorts of stuff that they can't prove that some guy just wrote in a book that's before history. That's not a religion. That's just facts. But like this person says, you know, it's 2023. I'm not a child. I believe that prehistory is fact. I don't believe in religion. Religion is silly. Wolfbox Clip says, we are moving your algorithm. Yes, you are. Thank you for that. We're past 20,000 likes now. Actually, we're wrapping up, so it's kind of unfortunate that we got this new influx of trolls and haters that I would love to engage with more, but I got to go pretty soon. Blank says, I understand that death is a mystery and maybe even scary to some, but come on, people, this BS. You got to love the comments. You know, they feel the need. There's something inside them that says, I have to say something to this guy who's just teaching about love and sincerity and obedience to higher moral standards and loving God and loving your fellow man and hoping for good things. You know, I have to say something hateful towards him. I do have bad news for you guys. When you say that stuff, you're actually blessing me. Jesus said that you're actually blessed when men hate you and revile you and say false things about you because you are teaching in his name. So ironically, I want you to keep doing this because I get a higher score on the leaderboard when people hate me for being a Christian. I should get to Parameters comment on YouTube. Says, thoughts on taking vacations? Should I wait for the resurrection? Probably infinitely better. Waiting for the resurrection to take a vacation, I wouldn't do that. I think vacations have a way of turning into productive work if you're in the right mindset. Persian Drum says, a Jewish colleague once told me that Jesus can't be the Messiah because he believes Jews collectively are the Messiah. I've definitely heard that point of view as well. Point number 2, he said they are a light to the nations, healer of the world, God's favored, heir to the throne, the suffering servant, God's anointed, God's priesthood, etc. Definitely heard that argument as well. And number 3, all to say that this parable matches up with my colleague's claim to be a competitor with the title of Christ, which is why he said he won't put his faith in Jesus. Absolutely. That is sort of a secular, some people believe that's a Zionist thing, that the nation of Israel itself as a political entity is the Messiah. Other people, many other Jews believe that it's just the collective Jewish population who will reform society through their various organizations, their various communal works, their social causes, and their daily lives, that they will transform the world. And I'm actually reading a book right now called, or I just finished it, I think, called Judaism for Dummies. And that's a big part of it, is this idea of healing the world. I think it's Tikkun Olam or something like that, they call it. And some term they have for it where, yeah, they think that if they start to heal the world, they will become the Messiah of their own people. And I mean, time will tell. Time will definitely tell what they get and what God thinks of all of that. If rejecting Jesus is the right decision or not. But obviously, as Christians, we think that what Paul said is true when Paul said that the Jewish people actually are partially blinded right now and not able to understand Jesus as their Messiah because of a decision by God, which again goes against the whole free will, perfect free will argument. It's much more a matter of prophecy and predestination, and there's a time and place for everything. So there is a time coming when the remnant of Jews will believe in Jesus, I believe. The Revelation says that, and I'm looking forward to that. But until then, I can't really even fault them because prophecy needs to happen. That's just how it works. Guys, let's see what else we got. Is there any worthy troll in the comments? Hart says, why do you threaten children with torture and separation from parents if they don't join your cult? Interesting accusation there. False accusations is actually another thing you get blessed for, so I appreciate that. Tyler W. says, we have 5 things written about Julius Caesar and a little about Aristotle and Nero, etc. Is there any follow-up to that, or is there any point to saying that? So, yeah, I mean, I believe Aristotle, Nero, Caesar all existed. Cat Child says, when are you coming back on? I am coming back on tomorrow evening. This one went super long. I was going to start early and finish early, but there was so much interesting stuff that I decided to just go all the way here. Hart says, do you actually think languages came from a tower that fell down? No, I do not. LD says, block the trolls and take real questions. People are trying to figure it out right now. We're finished the study, actually, so I'm not worried about questions either way. We're just enjoying ourselves here before I go. I try to see, genuine questions in here, but what you can do is go back and listen to all these studies using my YouTube channel, my podcast. I'm now uploading the audio to the podcast, and go back and see what we've talked about. I've answered pretty much all these questions before, but I'm glad to do it here. Anything else before I go? Wow, I'm really falling behind in the comments. There really are a bunch of trolls. I can't even ban all these people, but they're welcome to come back. There's no point in banning somebody just for trying to be a troll, because what they're actually doing is they're connecting with a human being, and they're going to go on tonight and they're going to think about what we've talked about. And that's how God works on people. He touches them in their hearts when they're not expecting it. And they think that they're defying God, and they're being rebellious, and they're being special. And then they're going to go to sleep at night, and they're going to think about that they haven't made their lives right with God, that they will die, and they're going to wonder about the next life. Is there a next life? Is there just nothingness? Is it all completely meaningless? Or are we experiencing something that God designed for a reason, and they have to repent, not because necessarily they're so evil, but just they're not right with God. They've never established a relationship with Him. And so trolls are just, Christians in the making too sometimes. The fact that they are connecting with this and it's bothering them in their hearts means that they're invested in this conflict, in this struggle, this idea, and they'll deny it. They'll pretend like it doesn't bother them, but it does. I mean, they won't admit it publicly, but they will deal with these same exact questions. Maybe they'll turn to Elon Musk or some other character and put their hopes in some man and think, that guy's going to make the world a better place, and maybe I'll get life extension and I'll become a transhumanist. They have some sort of weird, aliens might come, and they've always got some sort of weird other philosophy when you dig into it. Nobody's actually just like a neutral, I don't believe in anything. Like, when you dig into it, everyone has their thing they believe in that they can't prove, that helps them sleep at night and helps them cope. And unlike us who have the Holy Spirit and the wonderful treasures of the Bible and this communion and miracles that we've witnessed and stuff like that, they are resisting, and God will deal with it over time. It's not my job to change their minds. Debbie says, I landed on a few videos today, people being converted by trying to debunk the Bible. Yeah, that's true. Once people dig into the Bible and they try to prove it wrong, they almost always seem like to turn to Christianity afterwards, because they realize that you can't disprove the Bible. It's actually the best proof, and it's powerful. Okay, guys, I really do have to go, though. I'm staying up past when I should. So, Hart says, stop pushing your religion on everyone. If you think about it, I'm actually in my own private channel here that no one forced you to enter, and I'm minding my own business and talking to people who want to talk to me, including you. You decided to come here and talk to me. And so I didn't push anything on anyone. And if I had 0 people watching this, then that would be just how it works. But instead, you're deciding to stick around and engage with it and talk. And I invite you to stay and come back tomorrow. I plan on doing another one. And I don't hate you. I don't think you're going to necessarily go to hell, because there's still some time left for you to change your mind and for God to work on you. And so there's a lot of, look, don't pay attention to the haters in the chat. I don't hate you. You know, I kind of like trolls because at least they're standing up for what they believe in, and they're trying to say what they think, and they're not just, in a sense, they have what it takes to confront ideas, and that's better than just being completely distracted and passive and not engage with anything. So I don't know. I have hope for trolls. I never write them off so quickly. Unfortunately, if they get bad enough, I do have to ban them for the sake of the stream or mute them, but I prefer to engage respectfully. And, you have to bless those who curse you, and you have to love those who persecute you. And so, blessings to those who hate me here in chat. If you've said horrible things about me and you've accused me falsely, I wish blessings upon you, because, that's what I'm taught to do. And I don't hate you. I find you funny and interesting to listen to while I'm doing my studies. I will be back tomorrow if you want to continue to try to berate me. And all right, thank you guys for joining. Persian Drum says, atheists push their views onto Christians like their life depends on it, then cry victim when they victimize. While they victimize. Yeah, it's true. I mean, they like to be a victim while they're attacking you somehow, even though you don't say anything wrong. But it's good because it shows that the same exact pattern has been going on since Jesus. Jesus did nothing wrong. He was loving. He was merciful. He was gracious. He was kind. He was reaching out to the lost and the confused. And they hated him for it, and they blamed him for everything. And it's still exactly the same to this day. The more like Jesus you are, the more the world hates you. And they accuse you of the exact opposite, that they accuse you of the things that they're guilty of, and it just keeps going. And this is proof that Jesus was real and that he showed us the path, he showed us the pattern, and it just keeps continuing. And so if it didn't line up so well, I would be worried. I would be like, maybe this Jesus thing was actually not true, because, people hate me when I do this, but Jesus was loved by everyone. No, actually, it's the same pattern. So we see that. It's reassuring. It tells us that we're on the right track. Thank you, guys. I will try to come back tomorrow, God willing, and I hope to see you then.